Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
We are talking about the agricultural crisis, farm reform bills and farmers' protests again. And let me try and do it a little bit differently from what we might have done in the past. And if you find me cluttered in my head, that's because it is a very complicated issue. It is a very cluttered issue. So I will try my best. Don't give me the full marks for getting it right, but give me the full marks or at least decent marks or pass marks for trying my best. So first of all, let me list 6 tough realities of farming and farming economics. I will not explain all these right now. I will explain a couple. I'll leave one for the end of this episode of Cut the Clutter and one maybe in a separate full episode of Cut the Clutter. So what are these 6 tough realities? Number 1, the farmer is always right. Number 2, that agricultural GDP is about 4 times in its implications in politics. So what is X in agricultural GDP is 4X in terms of what we might call political GDP. Now these two I will explain towards the end of this episode. Then number 3, which is a no-brainer, that farming is a low-yield business. If nearly 60% of Indian labor is involved or their families are involved in farming, about 45%, 46% of Indian labor is directly involved in farming, and we take that 60% population extrapolation because rural families tend to be bigger than urban families. So about 60% of Indian families or people depend on farming, about 45% of Indian labor depends on farming. Farming only gives you 15% of GDP, so it's evident that 60% of India lives on 1/7, whether it's 1/2 of India, 1/2, 1/2 of India lives on an income that is 1/7 of India's GDP. So agriculture is a low yield business, no doubt about it. Next, and this is again something that I will not discuss in detail today because this deserves a separate Cut the Clutter by itself, that the food and nutrition debate in India is completely outdated. And the reality is that we have too much food in our country. I say it very carefully, we have too much food in our country but too little nutrition in our country, and that's why we keep doing so badly and worse on the global hunger index. And also now you've seen the National Family Health Survey as well. Nutrition is our problem, not so much food. In fact, too much food is our problem and too little nutrition is our problem. But as I said, that deserves a separate Cut the Clutter. We might do it even very soon, maybe even tomorrow, unless something else happens in the news environment. Number 5, state intervention and state support in agriculture is inevitable. It always happens. It happens everywhere. Question is how, and we'll go over those questions, but it is normal, it is correct, it is moral, it is not immoral at all. And number 6, because when we say farming is a low yield business, and this is a tricky area, then we also know that the farmer may get value for labor, inputs, profits over that in MSP, but farmers don't get value for the price of their land, for the value of their land. And I'll tell you why this works particularly badly in our country. The use of land is tightly controlled by the state in our country. So if a farmer wants, in most parts of the country, the farmer can't convert his or her land into an industry, into an apartment block, into a hotel, into a hospital. For converting to each one, you need to go through the government, run the gauntlet of the government, urban planning authorities, etc., etc. So farmers' land price and land value is artificially depressed because it can be only used for farming. So Swaminathan Commission, for example, when they came up with the idea of minimum support prices, they also added the rental value of the land, which really gets the economics of food completely go out of the window, not of this floor, but maybe if there were 20 floors on top of this from the topmost floor. So that did not work. So these are the 6 tough realities. Now let me list I told you there is a little bit of clutter, so I am trying to put this in order. So 6 realities I told you. Now I will tell you 5 myths, 5 most dangerous myths about Indian farming. And unless you understand these, you cannot understand the problem that is there right now and that is sitting on the outskirts of Delhi. So number 1, there is a general belief in urban India and among those who are not involved in farming, that farming in India is too heavily subsidized, that India gives too much subsidy. The facts, first of all, every country in the world subsidizes its farming. They cannot be farming without subsidies anymore, some kind of subsidies or the other. So if you see the reports of the OECD, that is the 8 most advanced economies in the world, if you see the OECD reports, the champion of all subsidies is Japan, where nearly 56% of its agricultural, the value produced by its agriculture, 50% of that is actually subsidy. That is very high. But again, because Japan is an industrial power, people don't want to do farming, may not want to do farming. So this is to create an incentive so that the country keeps its basic food security, 56%. Not just that, Japan also protects its rice farmer, for example, with levying duties, customs duty of up to 800%. It varies year to year, but up to 800%. Very, very high duties. Even wheat, all grains with very high duties. India, on the other hand, WTO says that you have to keep your farming within about 10%, subsidies within about 10%. That is at least India's pretense, and barring the odd year where it has to invoke the peace clause in WTO. That is because India is one of those countries which has to maintain a large buffer stock of food for food security. India is allowed a little bit of a leeway to go above 10%. So it's not as if India is giving too much subsidies to its farmers. In fact, the question we have to come to is India giving the right kind of subsidies? Are they going in the right hands, or are they being put to the right use? And are you getting the right yield from your subsidies? We'll talk about that in a little more detail in a bit. Number 2 myth, that Indian farmer is too pampered. So state governments should incentivize the farmer, particularly farmer who's dependent on MSP, etc. So MSP has got the farmer pampered. So state governments which benefit, where the farmer benefits from MSP, they should lean on the farmer to change his or her ways. This is completely counterintuitive. It's also unreasonable to ask for it, because the vested interest in this bad economics of MSP and grain production, vested interest extends to the state governments. Now I will give you some data a little bit later that will tell you that Punjab and Haryana are the 2 biggest beneficiaries of this bonanza of MSP. Why do I say bonanza? Because every state doesn't get MSP. MSP, government can fix MSP. For 23 items, agricultural items, government now fixes MSP. But you do not get MSP for more than 2 or 3 items. 2 you get, and that too in some states. So if you look at the total amount of grain that is procured in India, only 6% farmers in India are able to sell it on MSP. Most of those farmers are in Punjab and Haryana. So if you look at all that Government of India purchases under MSP, 43% of it is rice, 36% is wheat, pulses are 12%, coarse grain is 1%. So it's very rice wheat centric, and this is from a chart by Suyash Tiwari of PRS. You will see that chart on my screen, and that is very instructive. Then if you see from where is this wheat procured. So Madhya Pradesh, Punjab and Haryana, between the 3 of them, for 85% of all wheat procured in India comes. 85% of all wheat procured, Punjab, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh. So what about the wheat that UP produces? What about the wheat that Bihar may produce? What about the wheat that any other state produces? They don't get this benefit, and these are the 2019-20 figures. Then if you look at Punjab plus Haryana, the 2 states, they produce 14%, that is 1/4. They produce 14% of India's rice, but they account for 38% of all of India's rice procurement. So you can see that the dependence of these states on this MSP purchases is high. Again, if you look at wheat, of all the wheat produced in Punjab, 72% is procured by the government on MSP. Of all the wheats produced in Haryana, 78% is procured by the government. Of all the wheat produced in UP, only 11.5% is procured by the government on MSP. So Punjab and Haryana now have economies built around MSP. There is no surprise also that these are the only two states in the country where more than 50% of all their agricultural output comes from grain. All other states have moved on to value added products or milk and poultry, fruits, vegetables, etc. On a per hectare basis yield 12 times as much as grain. But there are issues about security, issues about what goes wrong, where do you sell it, etc., etc. Some states have cracked it, some states haven't. So now to think that states like Punjab and Haryana will wean their farmers away from paddy and wheat and make them do more value added stuff or more challenging stuff is unreasonable. And why do we say it's unreasonable? Why it's a myth that states will do it? Because for every ton of grain that FCI, Food Corporation of India, transports away from Punjab and Haryana, they pay a tribute to Punjab and Haryana, a cess. That cess total amount comes to about 7,500 crores just to take that grain away. Most of it now is excess grain. So maybe a solution is to bring that money back and give it to Punjab and Haryana and say, look, we pay this money to you in a very different way by picking our pockets and letting you pick up the change that falls on the way. Let me give us all of this change and maybe another 100% incentive over this. Use this money as a financial incentive to, one, persuade your farmers to move to something else, and second, to create a market system for that other produce. That is the way to approach it, not by saying, oh, tell the states to do it, otherwise up states ko arm twist kar do. That's a myth. It's not going to happen. Third myth is that India needs more and more grain for food security. Now, this is one of our more dangerous myths, and this myth arrives from our memory of days of food shortages, that we just need to keep a lot of food grain. So it is evident that we are keeping too much food grain. So we say usually that about 15% of our grain production. 15% of our grain production today will be almost 50 million tons, but not all grain. 50% of our wheat and rice production. That will be about, say, 35, 36. Then this year Government of India has given more money into PDS because of the COVID relief. That's another 4.5 to 5 million tons. If you add all that, even compared to that, at any given point of time, India holds almost twice as much in its buffer stocks, simply because India is producing too much paddy, too much wheat also, but more than wheat. Wheat is not such a big problem. Paddy, too much paddy, and it's being stored and you don't know what to do with it. You can't even export it. So India's food security is not threatened if India's grain production goes down. Obviously, grain production should not go down with yields going down. Yield should actually go higher. The land under grains should move to fruits, vegetables, dairy, poultry, stuff like that, and agriculture based industry. That's where farmers' incomes will go up, and that is where India's nutrition security will improve. So India's food security being constantly under threat is the third myth. Next, that if you just give MSP, that solves the farmer's problem. So pass a law now saying everybody gets MSP and the problems are over. Now problems of some farmers may be over to the extent of maintaining the status quo, but the problems of India's agricultural economics will not be over, because India has a unique agricultural economics which is distorted at all three levels: input level, because your water is free, your electricity is mostly free, and your seeds, lots of other inputs also get subsidies, plus your fertilizer is subsidized in a completely skewed manner. Our fertilizer subsidy focuses on urea. Urea is all nitrogen. Our urea is so cheap. Just to give you an idea, in India, urea is now selling at $76 a ton. If in India it's $76 a ton, do you know what it is in Bangladesh? Next door from us, it's $192 a ton. That is more than twice as much, 2.5 times as much. You think that's a surprise? In Pakistan, it is $254 a ton. So that is more than 3 times. In Nepal, it's $224 a ton, and in China, it's more than 4 times. It is $312 a ton. What that does is, it does 2 things. One, it makes farmers buy a lot more urea and just throw it into the soil. That causes a nutrition disaster, because soil gets too much nitrogen and too little of the other 2 elements in this cocktail of NPK, that is nitrogen, potassium and phosphorus. So, to go away, only nitrogen remains. Then, because too much urea is thrown, very little urea is used by the plant, the rest goes into the water table. That's why you find Delhi government saying every now and then that we can't clean this water from the Yamuna to put it in the drinking water system, because there is too much nitrogen, too much urea in the water. That's a urea that's bleaching, being sold at $76 a ton compared to $312 in China, and being used liberally, and then destroying soil health as well as water health. What that also does is that that's the second part of it, that it also sets up a beautiful smuggling market. So you smuggle a bag of urea from, you buy it for $76 a ton in India, you throw it away across the fence into Pakistan or into Bangladesh, you triple your value. I don't think fertilizer, there is so much smuggling across the Chinese borders, because those borders are of a different type. So this is so much arbitrage that it's difficult even for border troops to control. So that is the next myth. And our last myth is that if you move any land from agriculture to something else, or if you moved any land from grain to other kind of crops, India will have food shortages and India's food security will be threatened. So I will just give you one piece of statistics. Please see that. India has among the largest areas of arable land for farming. India has, say, ballpark 200 million hectares of land available for farming. This produces 297 million tons of food grain. China, on the other hand, has only 156 million hectares of arable land for farming. How much grain does it produce? 660 million tons. So, first of all, you already have too much grain. It's important in India, in fact, once you accept that this is a myth, it's important in India to increase your yields, to work on increasing your yields of from the land under grain cultivation and freeing up more and more land for growing other value added crops or other nutritional crops, because what India is short of is protein and micronutrients. So now, once we accept the 6 realities that I mentioned to you, and I know I said I will explain 2 towards the end of this cut the clutter, which I would. So once we accept those 6 points to be realities and these 5 points to be myths, what are the solutions? So here is a tentative list of solutions. Of course, you can expand it, experts can come in and they can add more. 1, all subsidies should now go straight to the farmer. If you see the 15th Finance Commission report, and I am sharing its paper on agricultural subsidies with you, it is most authentic data that's available. It tells you that roughly India's agricultural subsidies are about 2,35,000 crores as of couple of years back. So today it might be a bit more, say 2,50,000 crores. In the last year that there was a loan waiver that added another 1,22,000 crores. These are subsidies on electricity, on water, on fertilizer and things like that. Then there are unstated subsidies, for example, MSP. So, Government of India buys now paddy say at a certain price, say a price of 10x, but then sells it under PDS and under National Food Security Act for 2x. So, this is not pricing that is controlled by, that is regulated by any supply demand situation. So, that becomes an indirect subsidy. So, one solution is, and it will take some doing, it will take more than just passing some laws, that all subsidies should go direct to the farmer as direct money transfer, direct benefit transfer. Can it be done? I know it's fraught to make a comparison with Pakistan, but Pakistan has done it. It's also a bad year to do it because Pakistan has wheat shortage this year, but generally this has worked quite well in Pakistan. China has mostly abolished it, and both countries do not have a PDS. So, once again you can give direct subsidy to the consumer, direct subsidy to the grower, instead of distorting the agriculture markets at input stage, farm gate stage and the consumption stage, which we are doing right now. That is one. Number two, once you have done it, then let farm products discover their price in the markets, have a lot more markets and mandis and regulate those well. Number three, all inputs, once you give direct subsidies to the farmers, all inputs should be at market prices. So, the farmer, instead of feeling incentivized to use urea because it's mostly for free, may in that case use better, healthier NPK fertilizers, because farmer can then make a decision based on his or her costs. And next, all the savings that are made from this, because so much leakage will be avoided, all those savings Government of India should not take it, not keep it, not plow it back in the national budget or to balance at least a little bit of the deficit. It will only balance a little deficit because government spends a lot of money on many other things, but use it for irrigation and technology, and irrigation and agricultural technology, and also then to support healthier agriculture. So, farmers move on to what is more profitable for them, and spending money wisely on agriculture is very important. Irrigation, I will just give you one fact and then move on from it. Maharashtra, famous case or infamous case, between 2000-2001 to 2010-11, Maharashtra spent 81,206 crores on irrigation. By how much did it increase area under cotton cultivation in that state? By 5.1%. That's why Vidarbha is where it is. Whereas in Gujarat, half that amount spent on irrigation in that period increased area under irrigation by 67%. So, you have to use your money wisely. Even smaller amounts of money can work much better if you take out leakages from agricultural spending. And fifth, you have to accept the drought is an inevitability, and particularly now with extreme weather cycles, given climate change, a drought, a flood, these are inevitabilities, a drought more than a flood. So, you need a genuine farm insurance in such a way that 70% of India's agriculture is insured. To do that, India needs at this point about 18,000, 19,000 crores. More than half of it actually can come just by saving the transportation cost and cess that you incur on pulling out extra paddy and wheat from Punjab and Haryana. You can use the same money then to insure the farmers in those states and many more states. So, these are things that you can do. Now, having come here, I will tell you the two things that I promised to talk about in the end. So, why do we say that the farmer is always right, and that the agricultural GDP is 4 times as important in politics as in agriculture? Now, if 60% of Indians or Indian families depend on agriculture, that agriculture may be 15% of India's GDP, but each member of that family, each adult member has a vote. So, 60% of voters in India depend on 15% of GDP. That's why I say that agriculture, if agriculture's contribution to national GDP is 1x, its contribution to political GDP is 4x. Also, if you look at other data, you will see that any growth in agriculture, in fact, it's quite a fascinating data. So, I have it on the authority of good agricultural economists that farm growth has the potential to reduce poverty 2 to 3 times at the rate of industrial or any other growth. So, coefficient is 2 or 3. In fact, World Development Report of 2008 showed that in China that coefficient is 3.5. So, anything that improves in agriculture improves the state of mind or happiness index for that many more people, 3 times more people than growth anywhere. So, any growth in agriculture is good. In fact, for Latin America that coefficient is 2.7. So, this is what I describe as my doctrine of agro-political incumbency, that any government which ensures or under whose watch agriculture grows very rapidly, that government does well going ahead. Now, if you look at governments, look at Punjab for example. It's very difficult for a government in Punjab to get re-elected. One did some time back, very marginally against the runoff plea. Akalis got re-elected by just a fraction of a percent of votes. But Punjab is a state, rare state, where area under grain was already 67% in 2011-12. It's now gone to 71%. So, you might think that Punjab farmer looks rich, but Punjab farmer only looks richer compared to farmer in other states which don't even have MSP. Otherwise, Punjab's farmers' income has also been increasing at a very, very, very low rate, and that's why you find a heavy sort of index of unhappiness and anger in Punjab. Some of it spills out on the streets. And why do we then say the farmer is always right? Because the farmer is doing something which is low yield, low profit. A lot of the farmers do it because they have no option. A lot of the farmers do it because of the joy of farming. Now, you cannot come at them by saying, don't you realize that you are involved in a low profit, low yield profession? Don't you realize you are stupid? That is not the way you come to a farmer. You come to a farmer saying, thank you very much, particularly in Punjab and Haryana, for 40 years you've given this country food security. We owe you a debt of gratitude. Now what you are doing by continuing on with what you're doing is harming your water, harming your land, and also stunting your economic growth. So maybe it's good for you to move on to more challenging, more important things, and here is the country in gratitude incentivizing you to do this, and that's where the government has to move in and put its wallet or put the exchequer where its intentions are. So once again, treat the farmer with respect, say thank you very much, say we are very grateful, but now we need more milk, more fruits, more pulses, more oil seeds. Our country is importing $10 billion worth of oil seeds. Can you, the people of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, can you people again help us, the rest of the country, as you did with wheat and rice in the past? That is the way to deal with this. But if you come at the farmers by saying you are being misled, that Khalistanis have got into you, that ultra left people have got into you, then you are actually putting their backs up and you are setting the stage then for confrontational politics. And history of democracies tells you that no government, no political government wins a confrontation with the farmers.